Okay, so let's get started. We're gonna talk about how airfoils fly. And how badly I draw. Actually, that's pretty good. This is basically a cross-section of a paraglider. If it was a airplane wing, it would be closed here. Paraglider has an opening there that the air pushes in and fills it up, and then it creates its own imaginary barrier there. For now, we're going to just erase that and fill it in. There was a scientist, he was a hydrodynamicist, he was actually studying water. We're going to talk about it as though it's air because eventually everyone came to know that air and water are like brother and sister. They share a lot of the same properties. Air is said in the scientific world to be a viscous fluid, okay? What Bernoulli discovered about this shape, he knew that when water, we're going to just say water one more time, there was a flow of water, a relative motion of this to the water, that this created a force of lift going in this direction. And he wanted to know why. He wanted to study it. He kind of figured it out. And we now refer to that theory as Bernoulli's principle. All airfoils, when they're flying, are technically gliding downward through the air a little bit. We can climb when the air goes up faster than we're going down. And we can also climb when we add a source of power like planes, impellers, or jets, or whatever, something to push that airfoil forward. But as a wing is flying, we're talking about gliding craft here, like a paraglider. We're gliding all the time through the air, slightly down, and about this angle is pretty much a good definition. And what Bernoulli did is he had water flow around the airfoil, and he wanted to figure out why there was a force of lift. So there's going to be some lines here. That's why I wanted you guys to have that document. You'd be able to see there's a drawing of just this. And he noticed that the air kind of went up and around the wing like this, and there was air going under the bottom, and that if he was able to mark and photograph a particle here, an adjacent one here, one going under the bottom and one going over the top, and the one going under the bottom ended up here, right at the back of the wing, or the trailing edge, at the same time as the one that went over the top ended up well beyond the trailing edge. And he said, gee, I wonder why the one that has to go around the curve in a greater distance not only covered the greater distance, but went further than the one going under the bottom of the wing. And he came up with a theory that says that above the wing, where these particles are going, wow, this is a brand new marker. I think that's a brand new marker, and it's already dry. That's weird. I'll use a different color. But the particles going up above the wing speed up and spread out in this area, whereas the ones underneath compress a little bit in this area. And the spreading out is almost like a vacuum. It's a lower static pressure against the wing. And the magic happens when this moves fast enough that we create a force that is called lift. Pulling down on the wing, what do we call that force? Anybody? Gravity. Okay. So this is lift up here, gravity down here, and relative motion of air. The particles going around this curve are spreading out up above the wing, creating a low pressure zone. And there's a little bit of compression down here. We call this the high, and this is the low. And that's the magic of how wings fly. Now, if you're launching a paraglider or hang glider, you can actually get to flying speed by running. In zero wind, you can actually get the paraglider going fast enough that it'll create enough lift to support your weight as well as everything that's hanging on the wing. Everyone good with that so far?
Yep.
Yeah. Good.
Shiva, how are you doing? You getting it? Makes sense?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So the speed at which the air is moving relative to the wing, anybody you want to venture a guess what we call that?
Airspeed.
Brandon. Nick?
Airspeed.
Airspeed, okay. And relative to the ground, we call that, anybody?
Ground
speed.
Okay. So if I have a wind, let's say the wind is coming straight at me here, and I'm moving through the air at 20 miles per hour, but the air is moving towards me. I'm going through the air at 20. The air is coming at me above the ground at 10 miles an hour. My ground speed will be 10, but my airspeed will be 20. Okay. If I do a U-turn, now I've got the wind blowing 10 miles an hour behind me, and I'm flying at trim, which is, or no input to the glider. It'll go about 20 miles an hour. I would still be going through the air at 20, but the air is already going 10. So my ground speed will be
30.
30, okay? Good. If I'm going across the path of the wind, let's say the wind is blowing 10 miles an hour this way, and I'm perpendicular to it, I will move 20 miles an hour in a direction straight towards the computer camera, but I'll also be moving 10 miles an hour sideways, giving this effect. Does that make sense to everyone?
Yep.
The less
It's a vector.
So if I want to go straight across from here to the computer with a crosswind of about 10 miles per hour, I'm going to have to offset that by flying a little bit like this. All right. It's just like crossing a boat, crossing a river in a little kayak or canoe. If you want to go straight across a slow moving stream, if you point straight across the whole way, you're going to cross and go downstream. If you want to cross and go straight across, you've got to kind of angle the craft a little bit more towards where the water or air is coming from, and we call that crabbing. Okay, that is what we call crabbing. You know how a crab kind of crawls across the sand a little bit sideways. So that's called crabbing. Okay, so we're covering the big points here. Airspeed is the speed the wing moves relative to the air. Even if the wind was blowing 50 miles per hour, if somehow you could magically appear in that wind, flying and going in the same direction, you'd be moving, if you were flying 20 miles per hour airspeed, 70 miles an hour above the ground, but through the air, it would feel like you're flying in zero wind at that same speed. The wind on your face and the feel of flying would still feel like 20 miles per hour of airflow, okay? So a glider flies, if you don't pull the toggles down that pull the trailing edge, the back of the wing down, if you don't pull those down at all, and you just fly and you let the glider fly at its base speed, we call that trim speed. And it's usually very close to 20 miles per hour. If I've got a real big pilot, somebody, 250 pounds, their trim speed is going to be faster than a very light pilot. Somebody just over 100 pounds is going to move a lot slower than the big guy. And this has to do with drag, of how thick the lines are and how much drag there is. and the designers design the wings and try and design some of that out of it. But the reality is you're always going to fly a little bit faster if you're a big guy and a little slower if you're a smaller guy. The smaller guy has an advantage, smaller weight pilot has an advantage in light lift and usually can get up better, but they also have a disadvantage of top speed when there is wind and you need the speed. Okay, so I have a whole article on that in my article section about sizing wings. And so what we tend to do is we tend to size a smaller pilot in the top 10% of the wing or right at the very top, and a big pilot maybe halfway, middle of the weight range to 3/4 up. Almost nobody ever buys a wing at the bottom of the weight range. It's just going to be too slow, and that can be dangerous. You can fly a wing at the bottom of the weight range. It's just that you lose speed. Okay. So airspeed is the speed at which we're moving through the air. Ground speed is the speed at which we're moving relative to the ground. And we fly mostly by airspeed. One of the most important things I can ever tell you when you're learning to fly is to never confuse airspeed and ground speed. And that would normally occur, let's say you're down to about 200 or 300 feet, you started at 1,000, and all of a sudden you're going along the ground, coming in for a landing, and maybe you didn't realize the wind switched and you have a real high ground speed. Well, that should be a dead ringer that, I better check the wind, look at the windsocks and streamers and make sure I'm not going with the wind. The correct solution is to figure out which way the wind is coming, make a U-turn if necessary, and do your approach more into the wind instead of pulling the brakes to make the wing go slower and slower and slower. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the wing and brakes and how the wing turns and launches. And then we're going to move into the next topic of weather. So I'm going to draw a paraglider front view first. Doesn't really look like this, but there are openings right at the front of the wing. Sometimes they're rectangular, sometimes they're oval. And between those are little pieces of fabric. If you look inside a modern wing, it's kind of crazy. It's not like this piece of fabric is like it used to be. It used to look like this. This is looking at it from the side. Big opening, crisscross fabric. Now it's kind of like strip here, strips here. It's a crazy web. It's less fabric to allow the air to circulate through the wing to make it more stable. The reason there's openings, it's easier to understand this if I draw the old school. So this piece of fabric, the side view of it, it looks like this. The shape of the airfoil, way back to the trailing edge. And then there's openings with a crisscross. It's different now. It's like a spider web inside the wing, kind of. That's kind of how the wings, when I first started flying, they were just openings. They didn't have the crisscross fabric. They found it made the top surface of the wing smoother by adding the crisscross. And nowadays, not only do you have these, but you have diagonal fabric too between the ribs. And that helps make it more and more refined of an airfoil, a better, cleaner shape, better pressurization. They perfect exactly where to put the openings here at the front so that the air can go in and keep the highest amount of pressure. Ozone is one of my main brands, and they kind of came up with this shark nose. I don't know if you can see that. A little bit of a curve just above the opening. And that helps pressure have a higher threshold before collapses happen when you're flying in turbulence or the wing gets in front of you. Here's a basic front view of the wing. I'm gonna draw it like this, and you've got maybe 2 lines coming here down to 1. This joins and goes up here to 3 points. And then this goes down, and then at the bottom here, you've got webbing. Let me go thicker one. A riser. And then on each side, these go up. So they kind of cascade to more and more lines as you go up in the wing. A side view, wing here, you've got the front lines coming down, the A's, the B's, the C's, and the D's, and then a brake line coming down here. Here's the webbing. This is called the riser system down here. Sorry, this is a hard angle to draw at. And then a little tab, a pulley, and then you got your brake handle, okay? So when we are flying, this is the B lines, this is the C, this is the D, and this is the brake lines. Everyone good with that? You guys can see that okay?
Yeah.
Okay, good. All right, so when we pull the brake line, what happens is that pulls down the back of the wing, and that creates some drag. What drag does is it actually pulls the wing back a little bit and raises the front up a little bit. And that is what causes the wing to fly slower and slower downward. We never pull the brakes much below the shoulders because that is the magic amount that makes the wing go down the slowest. If you picture this is faster, slower, 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 slower. This would be too slow. It actually makes the wing go down faster, and the wing gets closer to what's called the stall, which means that the nose is too high. Now, paragliders don't stall very easy. You'd have to really try to stall. You'd have to yank those brakes real hard all the way down to your thighs on an entry-level wing to get it to stall. And we don't do that, but we do kind of that motion in a little bit slower fashion when we're landing. That gets the wing to come down at a very, very slow rate. All that energy of coming down, you keep the brakes up and you wait till the right moment to pull them down. And that gets the wing kind of, brakes are up. And then you're coming down, and then you start pulling down, and just before you touch down, it comes down the slowest. Okay, that's called flaring the paraglider. You don't ever want to flare a paraglider and pull the brakes way down at 20 feet, because in between 20 feet and the ground, the wing could stall. It would take a couple seconds for one of these entry-level wings to stall like that, but you don't want to chance that happening. If you didn't pull them very fast or hard, I'll be honest with you, an entry-level paraglider, if you were thousands of feet up, it might never stall. It might just go into a mode where it's going down a little bit faster, almost straight down. But let's not test that, okay? Because if you did yank the brakes down all the way down to your thighs, you could stall, okay? When we're pulling the brakes, we're changing what's called the angle of attack. So I'm gonna draw a quick picture of angle of attack and talk about how that works. The front of the wing, or the nose where the openings are, is called the front of the airfoil, or leading edge. The back of the wing where the brakes attach is called the, anybody know? Trailing edge. The bottom surface where the bottom fabric is called the bottom surface. And the top surface where the curve is called the top surface. So I have a airfoil. A little opening here. And if it's gliding along, let's just say this angle, slightly down, if I draw a line straight through the center, and that out here, this angle is called your angle of attack. Okay, if we pull these brakes down, pull the brakes down by pulling the handles down, that's going to raise the nose up. Let me get a prop for this. I'll be right back. So the nose goes higher when you pull the brakes down. Well, the glider at trim with no pull actually goes at the best angle through the air. When you pull it down, it actually starts going down a little bit steeper, but also slower. But this would increase the angle of attack to here. So when we pull the brakes down, we call that increasing the angle of attack. This angle greater. This is very technical. It's important to understand what's happening. If you were to somehow yank the brakes down hard and fast, you could get the nose up so that way up like that. So if you can imagine an airfoil way up high with the brakes pulled down, trying to fly, it's going to be trying to go this way at the end, and the air is going to go up and it's going to separate from the top of the wing. That is what we call a stall. And when a paraglider stalls, usually kind of swings you way out in front, and then it tail slides, and then the air starts squeezing out of it. And if you know what to do, you would actually lock your hands down, hold it in the stall until the wing is no longer back here, but comes back above you, and then you can let the hands up and you can fly off. But this is very advanced stuff. I'm not trying to scare you, but it is important to understand what a stall is. I've been flying paragliders since 1988. The only, I'd say I've done about 10 or 12 stalls on a paraglider, never for real. I did them on purpose, over water, training, doing maneuvers training, okay? I've never even come close to a full stall in the real world. So I kind of want to dispel that stalls are going to happen to you. You have to really try to stall a glider. You're either flying in extremely turbulent air behind a mountain in strong winds to get a stall to happen, or you're pulling the brakes hard and fast, maybe just to shoulders as you enter strong lift, which is, of course, something I'll teach you not to do. When you enter strong lift, the paraglider, let's say you're flying along and you hit a thermal, you're in the mountains and the nose starts going up and you feel yourself swinging forward. At that point, keep your hands up. Don't pull them down at all, and you won't have to worry about stalls ever. Okay, so it is important to know what a stall is, and not ever pull the brakes, yank them hard and fast down while flying. In fact, most of your motions are going to be just to the shoulders, one side or the other. How do we turn a paraglider? Somebody's done some lessons. We do two things to turn a paraglider. What are those two things?
Lean and pull.
Weight shift and pulling one brake down, or if you're already flying with both brakes pulled a bit, you let the outside hand up. Okay, so it's weight shift and brake control or brake input. All right, input could be just releasing the outside hand. When we go thermal flying, when we're circling in lift, we want to be closer to the shoulders and let the outside hand up from the shoulder to turn with good weight shift. That's the best way to turn a paraglider in lift. There is one other form of stall that happens probably about 5 or 10 times as often as a full stall. I actually was the accident review chairman for the national organization for a year. And during that whole year, I think I heard about 1 or 2 full stalls, but I probably heard about 20 spins. A spin is when you stall only one side of the wing, usually the inside part of the wing during a turn. And when that inside wing stops flying, the paraglider starts going like this. It actually stays inflated and it goes, it's called the spin. Starts rotating. The spin is actually, I've heard of many people getting into a spin and actually hitting the ground and not even having to go to an emergency room, maybe a sprained ankle or something like that. I wouldn't test that in the real world. I don't want to have anybody spinning to the ground, but it's not a super high rate of speed. More dangerous is just cranking into a steep turn, and it's called the spiral, and where you go down really fast. And if you ever were to hit the ground in a spiral or even a sharp turn in a landing approach, you're going to have a real high speed toward the ground. So therefore, we do not ever recommend anybody doing sharp turns close to the ground. Okay. All right. So if that's pretty good for the basics, I think everyone's caught up a little bit with airfoils. I want to start talking about weather. Weather is one of the harder topics to cover.